We are recording. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome. The Mancos Public Library is celebrating Women's History Month, which is this month, March. And we have some amazing women from Mancos who are introducing some other women from history. And before Connie Fox does her introduction, I'd like to just mention that the League of Women Voters has been such a mainstay. They're nonpartisan, they defend democracy, they empower voters. They are beacons of information and truth ever since 1920 when Carrie Chapman Catt started this group. So I would invite you today to celebrate them, and maybe a good way to do that would be by joining. So with that said, I'm going to introduce Connie Fox. Connie, are you there? You're going to do a brief introduction for us?
Hello. Hello, everyone. Women have always held up half the sky. We birth large-brained babies and keep them alive and growing for years and years of childhood. Yet you'd hardly know women existed if you depended on school history books published before the 1970s. Women's History Month is celebrated in March in the United States, the UK, and Australia. Canada celebrates it during October. They have a holiday called Persons Day, October 18th. That is the date in 1929 when the case of Edwards versus Canada was decided. Women finally could become senators and in general had same rights as men with respect to political power. The purpose of Women's History Month is to highlight and educate about the contributions of women in history and in the present. We owe women in Sonoma County, California, for starting Women's History Week in 1978. Gerda Lerner, a professor of history at the University of Wisconsin, who actually organized to on a national basis. Women's History Law 100-9, designating the month of March every year as Women's History Month. In March 2011, the Obama administration released the first comprehensive federal report on the status of women in 48 years. The theme of Women's History Month this year is Valiant Women of the Vote, Refusing to be Silenced. Last year, the celebration of the ratification of the 19th Amendment, women's right to vote, got slowed up by the pandemic. Also this year, the Library of Congress, the National Archives, the National Endowment for the Humanities, the National Gallery of Art, the National Park Service, the Smithsonian Institution, and the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum are collaborating on the theme of girlhood. It's complicated, parentheses. Their exhibits explore 200 years of girlhood in the US in politics, education, work, health, and fashion. Go to womenshistorymonth.gov to see their exhibits. Interesting as this all is, I have mixed feelings about Women's History Month. On one hand, it helps to educate us about the often ignored stories and contribution of women in all walks of life. On the other hand, it feels like women's history is of secondary importance and can be relegated to the month of March, 1/12 of the year. According to recent figures, American women working full-time earn 81.6 cents for every dollar earned by men. The Equal Rights Amendment remains to be ratified. Maybe someday there will be Men's History Month, which will highlight the achievements of men who were not supported by the women in their families, workplaces, and culture. I want to give special recognition to Midge Kirk, her historian, not historian, and adult education director of the Mancos Public Library for organizing this celebration. Now, I hope we're at the tail end of the COVID pandemic. Let's enjoy learning a whole lot more about amazing women. Thank you.
Thank you, Connie, so much. Now let's just dive in. I think I'd like to ask Ann Benson to pop on and tell us a little bit about you and your woman.
Well, hello, my name is Ann Bradstreet Benson. I was named after the first published American woman poet, and her story is embedded in my perception of myself. Midge has asked us to become acquainted with a few women whose lives impacted those around them, and I am grateful for the opportunity because I believe in the power of knowledge and the power of story. I'm not going to read about Ann Bradstreet, however, since she hasn't been overlooked by historians. There are books and university classes that tout the strength of an upper-class British woman who dared to write about her station in life. No, today is about Dr. May Edward Chin, a mixed-race woman born in 1896 in Great Barrington, Massachusetts. Dr. Chin is credited with blazing a trail for African Americans to integrate into the white-dominated field of medicine in New York City in the early 20th century. Chin's father was born into slavery in Virginia and made his escape in 1863 when he was 11. Her mother was African American and Native American of the Chickahominy Reservation near Norfolk, Virginia. As a young child, Chin stayed with her mother, who was a live-in housekeeper for the Tiffany family in New York. Living on the estate of the jewelry magnates, she was exposed to the rich education that the Tiffany children enjoyed, including languages, music, culture, and the arts. Though never officially receiving a high school diploma, she was accepted into Columbia University Teachers College in 1917. Her original plan was to major in music, but that changed when she wrote a paper on hygiene, and her professor recognized her talent and encouraged her to pursue a degree in science. In 1921, Chin graduated from Columbia Teachers College and went on to study medicine at Bellevue Hospital Medical College. During the 1920s, Black physicians were not granted admitting privileges or residencies at any hospital. So after graduating from Bellevue, she interned at Harlem Hospital, but they denied her admitting privileges. Instead, she established a private practice at the Edgecombe Sanitarium for non-white patients. She often attended to patients in their homes, even for surgery, as well as in her office. Her interest in early cancer diagnosis developed during these years. Research information, however, was denied her from various institutions, but she was clever, and when her patients went to specialists, she accompanied them as their general physician of record, thereby learning much more about their conditions and treatments. Dr. Chin studied cytological methods with Dr. George Papanicolaou during the 1930s, becoming an advocate for early cancer screening and detection. She was instrumental in developing the Pap smear during this time. In 1954, Dr. Chin became a member of the New York Academy of Science. Columbia University awarded her an honorary doctorate in 1957 for her many contributions to science. She was a tireless advocate, especially for the poor who had few resources. She practiced in Harlem for more than 50 years, retiring at the age of 81. She died 3 years later in 1980 while attending a reception at Columbia University. Dr. May Edward Chin's persistence to forge a life of service as a physician paved the way, or at least pushed aside a few of the brambles for others to follow. She was the first woman to ride with the Harlem Hospital ambulance crew, but she was not the last. She was the first African-American woman to graduate from Bellevue Hospital Medical College in 1926, but not the last. And she was the first African American to hold an internship at Harlem Hospital in 1928, but she was certainly not the last. That's it for me.
Thank you so much, Anne. Truly a woman that needs to be known about and remembered. Thank you. Maddie Butcher, I think you are going to introduce someone to us now.
Yes, thanks, Midge. Okay, I am introducing a woman who said, "It's essential to remain positive about your life and never give up." That is Tsuneko Sakamoto, one of Japan's first woman photojournalists. She is also one of the country's oldest photographers. Despite breaking her hand and both legs 6 years ago, she is still taking photos at the age of 106. Sakamoto has undergone rehab while continuing to photograph flowers for a project titled Hana Akari, or Flower Glow, a tribute to friends who have passed away. Sakamoto was born September 1st, 1914 in Tokyo. She went to college and at first studied home economics, but soon left that field of study because she had an ambition to become a painter. After initially dropping out, she enrolled in an institute of painting without asking her, telling her parents. Her career began as a part-time illustrator at a local paper in Tokyo. Sakamoto became a professional photographer at age 25 and garnered attention for her photos of pre- and post-war Japan. She was a member of the Photographic Society of Japan and officially became the society's, and therefore the country's, first female photojournalist. She says Margaret Burke White, the famous American photojournalist who lived from 1904 to 1971, was a major influence in her life. It seems her inborn curiosity has always driven her work. She said that she at times, and this is translated from Japanese to English, she was pretty scared but curious. I don't like it, but I want to see it. I feel compelled to face the world and let people know what I see. I just want to have the pictures taken. She has taken pictures of Burmese dignitaries, Hitler Youth, the Japan-America Student Conference, and the tripartite pact Women's Society between Japan, Germany, and Italy. Sakamoto photographed subjects from General Douglas MacArthur during the American occupation of Japan to striking coal miners and protesting students. In 1960, 20 years into her career, the Treaty of Mutual Cooperation and Security between the United States and Japan was signed. And so 8 years later, Ms. Sakamoto visited Europe for the first time, and from then on, she traveled widely. Ms. Sakamoto's lifetime work has been focused on taking pictures of independent-minded women who have struggled through the hard times, for instance, of the Meiji era, and forgive me if I'm not pronouncing that right. That's an era of the Japanese Empire, which was from 1868 to 1912, when women did not have much freedom or much choice in life. Over the years, she has had at least 10 books published on topics including the women of that era, and also how to live happily on your own as a 97-year-old. Another incredible trailblazing woman. That's mine.
Absolutely. Thank you, Maddie, so much for introducing us to Ms. Sakamoto. Next, I think Sylvia Flights has a woman she's going to introduce. Sylvia?
Hey everybody, I'm Sylvia Flights, and I've lived here in the Mancos Valley for about 20 years now, and I've been a physical therapist for about 25 years. And before all of that, I was a little girl in Southwest Missouri who wanted to dance. That was my first love, and led me on to a lot of other things. And I bugged and bugged my mom when I was 4. I think she was going to wait till I was 5 to put me in a ballet class, but I bugged her so much that she went ahead and put me in that ballet class when I was 4. And I continued on studying dance through high school and college and beyond, jazz, tap, and ballet. And then some of you now know me a little bit more through the yoga arena, but it's all tied together. And I also played flute, and I studied music and flute through college as well. So those things really made this woman that I'm going to tell you about resonate with me. And where she was born was just about 4 hours away from where I was born in Missouri. She was born in Oklahoma. So this is the story of Elizabeth Marie Betty Tallchief. And she was born on January 24th, 1925 in Fairfax, Oklahoma. Her father was a member of the Osage Nation. Her father's name was Alexander Joseph Tallchief. And her mother was named Ruth Porter. She was of Scottish-Irish descent. Ruth, her mother, was always interested in dance, but she grew up in poverty and she was never able to follow her dream to dance. When her daughters Marjorie and Elizabeth showed an interest in dance, they were immediately enrolled in classes. Elizabeth was only 3. Ruth discovered that her daughter Elizabeth was a brilliant dancer and loved music, and her specialty was ballet. At age 5, Tallchief was enrolled at a nearby Sacred Heart Catholic school. Impressed by her reading ability, the teachers allowed her to skip the first 2 grade levels. Between piano, ballet, and schoolwork, Tallchief had little free time, but she loved the outdoors. In her autobiography, she reminisced about time spent wandering around our big front yard and rambling around the grounds of our summer cottage, hunting for arrowheads in the grass. She continued to study piano, appearing as a guest soloist with small symphony orchestras throughout high school. At this point in her life, she believed that her career was going to be piano. But then when she was 17, she went to New York City seeking a career in dance. It was a rude awakening for her. Because of her Native American heritage, she was discriminated against. Doors that should have been open were closed for her. This did not deter Tallchief. She was determined and she just kept knocking on those doors. She persisted and eventually became one of America's prima ballerinas. In 1942, when one of the lead ballerinas abruptly stepped down from the Ballet Russe, the premier Russian ballerina company in the U.S., Tallchief was selected as an understudy. Top critics gave her rave reviews and her career was launched. Many tried to persuade Tallchief to change her last name to prevent dance companies from discriminating against her. She steadfastly refused. This was who she was, and she continued to perform as Maria Tallchief. In 1947, she became the first American to dance with the Paris Opera Ballet. She married choreographer George Balanchine in 1946. She was 21 and he was 42. Balanchine created her signature Firebird role, and I'm going to show you a picture here of her, if you could see that. And if you can imagine, this is a black and white photo, but her costume is actually brilliant red. From there, Tallchief went on to become the prima ballerina of the New York City Ballet. One of her best known roles was the Sugar Plum Fairy in The Nutcracker. She performed at the Bolshoi Theater in Moscow in 1960, the first American to do so. By 1951, she and Balanchine annulled their marriage, but stayed together professionally. She married Elmurza Natirbov, a pilot, on October 4th, 1952, but ended that marriage in 1954. So third time's charm. She married Henry Buzz Passion, a Chicago businessman, on June 3rd, 1956. Their union brought her only child, Elise Maria Passion. Elise Maria became an award-winning poet and executive director of the Poetry Society of America. Tall Chief and Passion remained together until his death in 2004. After she retired from dancing in 1965, not wanting to dance beyond her prime, she taught dance. In 1974, she and her sister opened the Chicago City Ballet, dance company, and ballet school. Tall Chief never forgot her Native American ancestry, and she spoke out often against discrimination and injustice. Tall Chief, as a prima ballerina, not only broke barriers for Native Americans, but also was one of the only Americans recognized in European ballet companies. Tall Chief was inducted into the National Women's Hall of Fame and received a National Medal of Arts. In 1996, she received a Kennedy Center Honor for Lifetime Achievements. Her life has been the subject of many documentaries and biographies, and I recommend that you look her up on YouTube and actually see her dancing. The New York Times said of Tall Chief, one of the most brilliant American ballerinas of the 20th century. She passed away in Chicago in 2013 at the age of 88. Her Kennedy Center biography states that Tall Chief was both the inspiration and the living expression of the best the United States has given the world. Her individualism and her genius came together to create one of the most vital and beautiful chapters in the history of American dance.
Wow. Thank you, Sylvia. What a beautiful woman. And I didn't know you were also a ballerina. What a lovely thing to know about a beautiful woman. Thank you. Next, I think we have Alice Ghosh. Alice, you have a woman to introduce to us. Don't forget to unmute, Alice.
And turn your camera back on.
We can come back to Alice. Alice, while you work this out, I'm going to invite Dana Timmons to join us and introduce her woman. Dana, are you there?
I'm here. So I'm Dana Timmons. I lived in the Mancos Valley for the last 6 years, but my family has been here since '83. The woman that I am introducing to you guys, her name is Ruth Hale. Hale was the founder of the Lucy Stone League, an organization whose motto was, "My name is the symbol for my identity and must not be lost." Hale's cause led her fight for women to be able to legally preserve their maiden names after marriage. She challenged in the courts and any government etiquette that would not recognize a married woman by the name she chose to be called. Ruth Hale was born in Rogersville, Tennessee in 1887. Her father was a horse breeder and a religious rebel who was thrown out of the Presbyterian Church. She was very close to her father and was devastated when he passed when she was 11 years old. Her mother held more traditional views and often caused discord with her rebellious daughter. Young Ruth had always been a free thinker and strong believer in women's rights. Her mother openly opposed the feminist cause, believing and speaking out publicly that women's place was at home raising children. Her mother and her clashed constantly, that her mother sent her to Roanoke, Virginia when she was 13 to the Hollins Institute to study music and painting. Ruth became more and more passionate about women's rights and political reform. At the age of 18, she became a reporter for the Washington Star. She eventually moved to New York City, where she worked as a reporter for the New York Times and a drama critic for Vogue. She was also a member of the Congressional Union for Women's Suffrage. In 1914, when she was 27, she met the journalist and sports writer Haywood Brown at the baseball game. From the moment he was introduced to Ruth, he was quite intrigued by her. She was not a conventional beauty, but she had a striking face, large gray eyes, and dark blonde hair. Apparent to him from the moment of their meeting were her curiosity, candor, vitality, mental vigor, and her combativeness. He thought her the least coy and the least suitable female that he had ever met. She constantly laid it all out on the line with no apology. She questioned, challenged, and hammered away at every preconception that affected the male attitude towards women. She and Byrne developed a friendship, taking long walks in Central Park and debating constantly. He stated that nobody ever defeated Miss Hale in an argument. The relationship did not begin as a romantic one, but eventually he asked her to marry him, and she tentatively said yes, but only if he would agree to marry, that their marriage, they would be equals, that she would maintain her independence, her career, her identity, and they would be equal heads of the household. They were wed June 7th, 1917. She would never be known as Mrs. Bourne, but always as Ruth Hale. She had campaigned hard for the right to women to keep their birth names after they married as a symbol of their equality to their husbands. Immediately after wedding, they traveled to France to report on the First World War, she for the Chicago Tribune and he for the New York Tribune. She was one of the first women to report on the war. Bourne said of Hale, "When we met, we were reporters, and I have never denied that Ruth Hale was the better newspaper man out of the two of us." They returned to the US in 1918. On March 10th, she delivered their son, Haywood Hale Bourne. Her career languished a bit while he went on to become one of the country's best known, most highly paid journalists with exceptional visibility and influence, which he used to fight for liberal causes and for the underdog. Yet none of this would have been possible without Hale, who helped her husband think through and write a considerable portion of the articles that gave him such prominence. Some of their friends believed Bourne would have remained a sports writer if he had not married Hale. Much later, their son concluded she would have been who she was, whether he existed or not, but he was very much her creation. She could not rid herself of the conviction that somehow, as long as she was married, she would be deprived of her individuality, even her identity. The couple divorced in November 1933, but remained very close friends. She died on September 18th, 1934. Bourne wrote the next day in the New York Telegram, "My best friend died yesterday. I would not mention this, but for the fact that Ruth Hale was a violent fighter in an important cause. Out of the 1,000 debates I lost, or out of the 1,000 debates we had, I lost 1,000. Nobody ever defeated Miss Hale in an argument. The dispute was about feminism, but we both agreed in law and in art and in industry and in anything else you can think of, men and women should be equals." And that was Ruth
Wow.
Hale.
Wow, what a spirit. Thank you, Dana. Thank you so
Thank you.
much. Alice, are you ready?
I'm ready. Yes, I'm ready.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
I'm Alice Gausch. I moved here about a year ago to the Southwest Four Corners. Lived almost, well, my whole life on the East Coast, in particular in Vermont. So Since COVID arrived soon after I did, it's been a very interesting year adjusting to a new place. But I'm happy to be here, happy to be supporting the library and Midge and her programs. And I'm also happy to be part of recognizing women. So my woman is not a household name. I'd never heard of her, and maybe you haven't either. Her name is Nanette Streichen. She was born in Augsburg, Germany in 1769. Her maiden family name was Stein, S-T-E-I-N, which is easy to remember because of the piano that's so famous now, Steinway. But that was not her family's business. Hers was Stein, her father's business. Well, more about Nanette. She's been hidden away and marginalized by history, but she was actually one of the finest keyboard manufacturers in all of Europe. Of course, that's the piano keyboard, not our today's computers. It is known widely, however, that she was a good friend with Beethoven. But we don't remember that she built his piano at her family's company. She was the sixth child in the family, and her father was a renowned craftsman and manufacturer of pianos already. And this was at the time when the development from the harpsichord style of keyboard instruments was becoming more piano and more like we know the instrument today. When she was only 8 years old, she played for Mozart, who criticized her posture and the way she grimaced when she played. But he admitted she had genius. At the age of 10, she had mastered many of her father's building techniques and had earned a reputation as a mechanical wunderkind. She first met Beethoven in 1787 when they were both later teenage years, and he was returning from where he had met Mozart to play for Mozart also. So their friendship with Beethoven and Nanette went on for more than 20 years. She was 23 and recently married when her father died. She partnered with her brother, who was only 16, to set the piano business up in Vienna. She transported pianos by raft, would that be down the Danube, to the new location and changed the name of the business from J.A. Stein to Gertschwister or Siblings Stein. I'm not good at German. Piano design was changing rapidly at this time, and concerts were moving beyond the aristocratic salons into larger music halls. Artisans and piano manufacturers were under great pressure to produce heavier and more resonant instruments for the large venues. By 1802, she had lost a 6-year-old son, but was still mother to 2 others, a daughter, Sophie, who went on to become a renowned pianist, and a son, Johann Baptiste, who joined her in the piano business. She was engaged in an intense dispute with her brother over business that eventually led to dissolving the existing company, and each established their own companies after that. She had made some major improvements to pianos, one being expanding the keyboard range from only 5 octaves to 6.5. And by 1809, she had further reworked her father's design and was delivering some of the loudest, largest, and sturdiest pianos in Vienna. Beethoven insisted on a bigger piano that would create more sound, and that might have been at the time when his hearing was really deteriorating. But her company produced 50 to 65 grand pianos a year, and her business was considered by many to be the finest in the city. In 1812, she built a 200-seat concert hall next to the showroom and decorated it with busts of well-known pianists. Concerts there attracted the many upcoming and talented musicians, and the music hall became a hub for Vienna's musical activity. And of course, Vienna was the music capital of the Western world. Always a friend to Beethoven, in August of 1817, she took on another job. She agreed to manage Beethoven's chaotic household. His hearing loss was severe. He was in a creative slump and he was in crisis. Apart from his own family, he was raising a young nephew and needed to provide a good home for all. This is where Nanette stepped in. Beethoven wrote over 60 letters, which still exist, over the 18 months that she was managing his house, and he ordered her to take care of his laundry, mend his socks, purchase groceries, dusters, and shoe polish. He had become increasingly paranoid, not trusting any of his servants. He believed they were all out to either poison him or rob him. He had an ongoing relationship with her for over 20 years. Although it was not romantic, he trusted her and called her his good Samaritan. They had a deep connection, and it began with and centered on the piano. And he died about 7 years before she did. She did outlive him. The company continued to thrive under her son and eventually her grandson, Emil, who built pianos for Johannes Brahms. The company closed for good upon his retirement in 1896. So that's a 100-year run of grand piano production. Her legacy and instruments live on, however, in museums around the world and in the hands of women she inspired. In the mid-1960s, an artist and calligrapher named Margaret Hood was raising 2 children and making harpsichords. After she did research in Europe, she began to specialize in reproduction of the Streichen pianos. Hood produced them in her Platteville, Wisconsin workshop. She was building an 1816 Streichen 6.5 octave grand piano when she died in 2008. But in the meantime, a trained concert pianist named Ann Acker met Mrs. Hood, and the two became fast friends. Hood became not only a friend, but a mentor to Acker, who was raising her own children. She began to build and repair harpsichords and antique pianos. When her friend and mentor, Hood, died, Ann Acker purchased the reproduction Streicher from Hood's husband. I explained to him, she said, that a piano researched and begun by a woman that is a replica of a piano designed and built by a woman needs to be finished by a woman. The piano, the work of 3 women over 2 centuries, had its debut in 2019 at the Boston Early Music Festival. And that was the year of Nanette's 250th birthday. Thank you.
Oh, Alice, thank you. What a legacy, huh? Amazing. Amazing. Thank you so much. And now, Gloria Thatch Woody. Are you with us, Gloria?
You're ready to
Yes.
go.
Can you hear
Hello,
me?
Gloria. Yes, you're good. We hear you and we see you.
Okay, wonderful. I am probably one of the very few African Americans living in this little town of Mancos, Colorado. My husband and I moved here from California in 2006. Since 2007, I have been an ongoing member of the Mancos Valley Chorus. And as a result of that, I want to introduce you to who I have learned about, a woman who was a prolific composer and quite worthy of note. And you cannot see me. I have to get my husband to come over and work the thing.
You're right here, sweetheart.
Oh,
I see you just fine.
usually I'm on the
Well,
main screen in the middle.
I can see if I can fix that.
Okay.
Start talking.
Okay. Blah, 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 blah. Blah, 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 blah,
Hang
blah.
on,
No,
hang on.
you're good, Gloria. You're good.
Okay. You could see me?
Yes,
All right.
yes.
He's the only one.
Here
that's
we go.
got-
Loop-de-loop. All right. I want to introduce you to Florence Beatrice Smith, who was a prolific composer, and she's quite noteworthy. Florence was born in Little Rock, Arkansas on September 9th, 1887. Her father, James, was a dentist, and her mother, Florence, was a music teacher, school teacher, and businesswoman. Despite the racial tensions of the times, the family did well and was respected within their community. Her love of music was evident at an early age, and her mother tutored and guided her. Florence's first piano performance was at the age of 4. Her first composition was published when she was 11. At 14, she graduated valedictorian of her class at Capitol Hill High School in Little Rock in 1903. She immediately enrolled in the New England Conservatory of Music in Boston, Massachusetts. Even though the conservatory did admit Blacks, she enrolled as, quote, Mexican to avoid any stigma being a Black woman, which may have carried some problems. She studied composition and counterpoint and wrote her own first symphony. She earned degrees as an organist and piano teacher, graduating in 3 years with a bachelor's degree in 1906. Florence returned to Arkansas to teach music at various schools until 1910, when she moved to Atlanta, Georgia, to head the music department at Clark University for 2 years. In 1912, she married Thomas Jewell Price, a prominent attorney. The couple had 2 daughters. She taught piano and wrote short pieces for the piano. Despite her impressive credentials, she was denied membership in the Arkansas State Music Teachers Association because of her race. During the 1920s, racial tensions were worsening in Arkansas, and the Prices moved to Chicago, Illinois in 1927. Here she had more professional opportunities for growth in her field. Her marriage broke down, and they eventually divorced in 1931. She was now a single parent raising 2 little girls. To make ends meet, she worked as an organist for silent film screenings and composed songs for radio ads under a pen name. Even though her training was steeped in European tradition, Price's music consists of mostly the American idiom, and it reveals her Southern roots. Being deeply religious, she frequently used the music of the African American church as material for her arrangements. Price began to incorporate elements of African American spirituals, emphasizing the rhythm and syncopation rather than using the text. Her melodies were blues inspired and mixed with more traditional European romantic techniques. She eventually moved in with her student and friend, Margaret Bonds, also a Black pianist and composer. She continued her musical studies at the American Conservatory of Music and the Chicago Musical College. This was a rich and fulfilling time for her, firmly establishing herself as an outstanding teacher, pianist, and organist in her community. She began to be widely recognized and published during this time. In a 1943 letter, which was discovered in 2009, the letter she wrote was sent to the conductor, Sergei Kosovitsky. She introduced herself thus: "My dear Dr. Kosovitsky, to begin with, I have two handicaps, those of sex and race. I am a woman and I have some Negro blood in my veins." She plainly saw these factors as obstacles to her career, because she then spoke of Kosovitsky knowing the worst. Kosovitsky ignored her, never responded. She had a difficult time making headway in a culture that defined composers as white, male, and dead. One prominent conductor took up her cause, Frederick Stock, the German-born music director of the Chicago Symphony. In 2009, the discovery in an Illinois attic of dozens of scores of music renewed public interest in the music of Florence Price. Piles of musical manuscripts, books, personal papers, and other documents. The name that kept appearing in the materials was that of Florence Price. The find was certified by the University of Arkansas that yes, this was Florence Price's music. This cottage where the discovery was made in 2009 had been her summer home. Her music combines a rich and romantic symphonic idiom combined with the melodic intimacy and emotional intensity of African American spirituals. In 1964, the Chicago Public Schools named an elementary school after her. In February 2019, the University of Arkansas Honors College held a gala concert honoring Price. Also that same year, the International Florence Price Festival announced that its inaugural gathering celebrating Florence Price's music and legacy would take place at the University of Maryland School of Music in August 2020. I don't know that that happened because of the pandemic, but at some point we can expect to hear more about her. And that is Florence Price.
Oh, thank you, Gloria. So beautiful. What a memorable woman. It's interesting. I've loved her music. I've heard it on our local PBS station, but didn't realize until a couple of years ago that that's who it was, that she was a woman. So thank you for bringing her to us today.
Okay.
Okay, next up, last but not least, is the beautiful Miss Julia Whalahan.
Thank you, Midge, so much for that gracious introduction. I feel so honored to be amongst you amazing women who have plotted your own course in history, of course. I am sitting here listening to these stories, and it made me realize that as a young teenager, I decided to keep my own maiden name because I felt I wanted to, if I became famous or whatever, that I wanted to have my name. Even though I, of course, was married to Mr. Patrick LaChapelle, which is a beautiful name, it also made me think about my mother. I am the middle of 7 children and was raised in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, Irish Catholic family. My mother really taught me to be independent. She was in theater, she sang. To have 7 children and to be pregnant a lot of her life, I just was so amazed by the modeling from my own mother. And of course, my love of music, and also to be in the Mancos Valley Chorus for so many years. And we're all missing that very, very much. I have lived in Mancos Valley for 29 years, but when I get a chance, I would love to show all of you the handshake from Wisconsin. Anyway, so my lady is Mary Louise Booth. Do you think women fitted for journalism? Eminently so. Mary Louise Booth was born on April 19th, 1831 in Long Island, New York, to William Chatfield Booth and Nancy Monswell Booth. Although she did attend public schools, she was primarily self-taught and considered quite precocious. As soon as she could walk, her mother said she was following her about with a book in her hand, begging to be taught to read stories for herself. Reportedly, she read the Bible and the Plutarch at 5 and Racine by the age of 7. She had a particular aptitude for foreign languages. Her father was a miller and educator who believed that teaching was the only suitable career for a young lady, and consequently did not support her inclination toward becoming a writer. At 18, she rebelled after teaching in his school for only a few years and moved to Manhattan, where she pursued a literacy career. She supported herself by sewing vests during the day while studying and writing in the evenings. Eventually, she was hired by the New York Times, where she wrote articles on education and women's topics. During this time, she became friends with Susan B. Anthony, becoming acquainted through their mutual work in the New York State Teachers Association to equalize educational opportunities. Mary became very active in the women's rights movement, serving as secretary at the conventions in Saratoga, New York in 1855, and then again in New York City in 1860. While engaged in this work, she also began her own historical writing. Her history of the city of New York was the first comprehensive history of the city to be published. In 1856, she began her career as translator and translated more than 40 works from French to English. During the Civil War, she used her skills to promote the Union cause, translating Count de Gasperin's The Uprising of a Great People, the United States, in 1861. Reportedly, she worked 20 hours a day and completed this task in less than a week. In 1867, Harper Brothers began the weekly magazine Harper's Bazaar and hired Mary as its editor. She held this position for 22 years, earning what was then an impressive salary of $4,000 a year. During her tenure, circulation reached 80,000. She never married, although she was engaged briefly in 1887 during a trip to Venice. She knew everyone who was anyone: President Lincoln, George Sands, Winslow Homer, Oliver Wendell Holmes. As the founding editor of Harper's Bazaar, she performed a great service to suffrage, according to her friend Elizabeth Cady Stanton, by showing that a woman can hold for years a place at the head of a profession so difficult and so arduous. There she is in all her glory, Mary Louise Booth.
Oh, Julia, thank you. A woman
You're
can.
welcome.
Yes. I want to thank you all so much. I know I enjoyed just such beautiful presentation and women that we didn't know about. And I hope that our viewers are going to enjoy as well. I also hope that it's kind of tickled curiosity that you all, not just our ladies here from Mancus, I mean, the broader view, will be a little more aware of history and how there is a her story. So thank you all.